Why hadn't they come for her? That question wouldn't leave her mind. It pressed harder than the bleeding wound at her side, louder than the ringing in her ears. She trained herself to master silence, to use it as a weapon, but now it pressed against her like a coffin lid. She adjusted her position against the crumbling wall, grit scraping against her back. The desert air was dry, baking the rocks by day, freezing them by night. The kind of place where even shadows seemed to hold their breath. Her lips were cracked, her mouth dry, but her eyes, sharp and defiant, never lost their edge. They thought she was finished, wounded, cornered, alone. But they didn't know Captain Lena Mercer. To most, she was a name on a roster, a line in a report, but to the few who had walked into fire with her, she was Haven, the one you anchored to when everything else broke apart, the one who refused to bend even when bending might save her. She hadn't chosen the name, it had been given like a gift, like a curse. And tonight she would have to live up to it or die trying. A murmur floated across the stones, enemy voices, hushed but confident. They were circling, their boots grinding on gravel, rifles at the ready. She pictured their movements the way she'd been trained, mapping every sound, every pause, a wolf pack closing in. She let her pistol rest in her lap, her fingers slick with blood, her thumb brushing the safety. Her other hand pressed against her side, feeling the warmth of life leaking away. She knew what that meant. She had minutes, an hour if sheer willpower held. But then what? Her breathing hitched as a memory cut through. Not the battlefield, not strategy, not orders, but a kitchen back home, the dull hum of an old refrigerator, morning light cutting across chipped tiles, her sister at the counter holding a ceramic mug. You don't have to keep proving yourself, her sister had whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. No one's asking you to. Lena had stared back, forcing a smile she didn't feel. It's not about them. And she had left it there, never explaining, never confessing, because the truth was heavier than words, heavier than anyone outside could carry. Now, sitting in the dirt with death inching closer, she wondered if her silence had been a kind of betrayal. She shook the thought away, not now, not here, reflection could wait, action could not. Her mind replayed the mission, the briefing had been clear, the team had rehearsed it a dozen times, in and out, quick and surgical, but the ambush had shattered everything. The sudden silence on comms, the crack of gunfire, the smoke, the explosion that threw her against stone. She remembered the medic shouting, dragging someone through dust. She remembered the young sergeant's scream cutting off mid-word. And then nothing. No backup, no comms, just the desert swallowing sound. It didn't feel like chance, it felt like betrayal. Her hand clenched tighter on the pistol grip. One shadow moved closer, bold. A glint of metal flashed in the half-light. Lena's muscles tensed. She slowed her breathing, narrowing the world to one trigger, one target. The figure stepped into range. Her shot cracked like lightning, the body fell, silence returned. The others froze, reassessing. She could almost feel their surprise. Wounded, outnumbered, bleeding, yet she struck first. A grim smile tugged at her mouth. But she knew she couldn't hold them forever. Her strength was running out, she had to think bigger, longer. Her eyes flicked to the ridge beyond the ruin. If she could crawl that far, maybe she'd find higher ground, a better line of sight. But every movement sent waves of agony tearing through her ribs. She tried anyway, inch by inch, dragging herself along the wall. Gravel bit into her palms, sweat stung her eyes, her breath rasped in shallow bursts. The weight of her gear felt like chains. And still she moved. She thought of her team, the medic with the half-written letter tucked in his pocket, the quiet demolitions expert who never wasted words, the young sergeant who laughed too loudly at bad jokes as if laughter alone could keep fear away. Were they gone? Had she failed them? Her throat tightened, she forced the thought away. Not now, don't break, not yet. A new sound cut through the night, a whistle, a signal. They were coordinating, moving to box her in. She flattened herself against the wall, her fingers trembling as they reloaded the pistol. 2 magazines left, maybe 20 rounds, against how many? It didn't matter, numbers were meaningless now. What mattered was time, what mattered was the choice. She could wait, let them come, die fighting. Or she could push forward, drag herself to the ridge and try to uncover the truth. Because in her gut she knew the ambush wasn't random. Someone had wanted this, someone had known. And if she died here without finding out who, her team's blood would vanish into the sand unanswered. She couldn't let that happen. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Strength isn't what keeps you alive, Lena, it's what you give away that matters. Maybe he had been right, maybe her survival wasn't the point. Maybe what mattered was carrying something forward, truth, dignity, resistance, long enough for someone else to see it. She pulled herself another few feet, every movement a scream inside her chest. Her vision blurred, dark at the edges. The ridge seemed impossibly far. And then, footsteps fast, coming straight for her. Her hand snapped up, pistol raised. She blinked, sweat and blood from her eyes. But the shape that emerged from the dark wasn't what she expected. Not an enemy, not exactly. The figure paused, silhouetted against the pale glow of the horizon, helmet low, rifle ready, watching her. Something in the stance made her hesitate. And in that pause, fragile and razor-thin, one thought hammered inside her head. If this wasn't the end, then what was it leading to? Who was he? The figure stood in the half-light, framed by stone and silence, his weapon lowered slightly but not enough to comfort her. A helmet hid his face, shadows swallowing the details. For a moment she wondered if her mind, fatting from blood loss, was conjuring ghosts. The desert had a way of doing that. When the night stretched too long, when silence pressed too heavy, your brain painted people out of nothing. But this wasn't nothing. His boots ground against the gravel. His rifle caught the faintest shimmer of moonlight. He was real. And he was watching her. Her pistol trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on him. She refused to look away first. "Who are you?" she rasped, her throat raw. No answer, just the faint tilt of a helmet, as though he were weighing her soul. Her ribs screamed as she shifted, trying to drag herself backward. She hated the weakness in the movement, hated showing anything less than control, but pain was merciless, it stripped you bare. And right now she was bleeding too fast to pretend. "Say something," she demanded, her voice sharp despite the crack. The figure finally moved, slow, purposeful. He stepped closer, not rushing, not cautious, like someone who had already decided the outcome. Lena tightened her grip on the pistol. One more step and I. He raised his hands, empty, palms forward. It was the smallest gesture, and yet it cut through her anger because it wasn't surrender, it wasn't dominance, it was something stranger. Recognition. But how? Her head spun, she tried to focus, tried to lock the world into simple lines, enemy or ally, threat or not. That's what she'd been trained to do, but his silence was unnerving, and then she noticed it. The patch on his shoulder, torn, burned at the edges, but the outline familiar. Her breath caught. No, impossible. That was her unit. Her voice cracked, "You're one of us." The figure lowered his hands, removing his helmet with a slow, deliberate motion. Dust and sweat clung to his skin, his eyes dark, haunted. She knew that face. Corporal Diaz. The young demolitions expert who had said little but always delivered. Steady hands, calm eyes, the one who seemed too grounded to ever break. She thought he was gone, buried in the blast, swallowed by the chaos. Yet here he was, alive, standing in front of her. Relief and confusion tangled inside her chest. Diaz. He nodded once, but his eyes didn't soften. They carried something harder, something unsettled. How did you make it?" she asked, the words tumbling out, rough and desperate. He crouched beside her, his rifle resting against the wall. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept the ridge, scanning the shadows, always vigilant, always cautious. Finally he said, "Same as you, shouldn't have, but did." His voice was lower than she remembered, heavier. She swallowed, forcing herself upright despite the pain. The others. He didn't meet her eyes. Her stomach dropped, she pressed harder, ignoring the stab in her side. "Diaz, tell me." Silence stretched, the night held its breath. "They're gone," he said finally, "all of them." The words hit harder than the bullet in her ribs. She felt them sink, anchor, crush, her team, her family in uniform gone. She had led them into the fire, promised she'd bring them home, and now silence. Her chest tightened, her throat burned. For a moment she couldn't speak. Diaz glanced at her, reading the storm behind her eyes. "Not your fault," he said quietly. But it felt like it was, every decision replayed in her head, every command, every second she couldn't take back. She wanted to scream, to rage, to claw at the night and demand answers. Instead, she whispered, "They trusted me." "And they fought because you were there," Diaz replied, sharper now. "Don't take that from them." His words cut through her grief, though they didn't ease it. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and smoke. The voices of the enemy drifted again, closer now, their formation shifting. They were cautious, but they hadn't given up. They knew she was cornered. They didn't know about Diaz yet. She studied him, suspicion sparking. "Why didn't you signal me sooner? I thought you were gone." Diaz's jaw tightened. "I had to be sure." "Sure of what?" He looked away, scanning the horizon again. "That you weren't the one who sold us out." Her blood ran cold. "What?" He turned back, his eyes steady, unreadable. "You don't think it was random, do you? That they knew exactly where we'd be, when?" Her mind reeled. She had thought the same thing, but to hear it out loud, directed at her, it cut deep. "You think it was me," she said, disbelief sharpening her tone. "I don't know what to think," he admitted, "but someone wanted us dead, and you're the one they didn't finish." The accusation hung heavy between them. She wanted to snap back, to deny it with fire, but the truth was she couldn't explain everything. There were things she hadn't told them, not yet, things tied to why she was even here on this mission. And maybe that silence looked like guilt. Her chest heaved, she forced the words out, steady and low. Diaz, if I wanted you dead, I wouldn't be bleeding beside you. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he gave the smallest nod, not full trust, not yet, but enough to move. The whistle came again, closer. The enemy was tightening their net. Diaz picked up his rifle. We move now. She almost laughed, bitter, sharp. Move, look at me. She pressed a hand to her side, blood seeping fresh. I can barely crawl. He didn't flinch. Then I'll drag you. Her eyes burned, anger, pride, shame, hope, all twisted together. She hated needing help, hated being seen broken. But she also knew alone she'd already be dead. Fine, she breathed, but we don't run blind. There's something out here, something they don't want us to find. Diaz gave her a look, one eyebrow raised. And you know this how? Her lips tightened because they didn't just try to kill us, they tried to erase us. That means we were too close to something. His silence was answer enough. He knew she was right. He crouched, slinging her arm over his shoulder. She bit down a groan as pain flared. Step by step, they moved slow but steady toward the ridge. The desert stretched endless, indifferent. The moon carved pale light across broken stone. Every sound seemed too loud, boots crunching, breath rasping, heart pounding. And yet in that struggle, a strange calm settled over her. Because she wasn't alone anymore. Her team might be gone, the mission might be shattered, but in the ashes something still burned. And she would not stop until she found the truth. Not for herself, not even for Diaz. But for the ones who would never walk out of that desert. The ridge loomed closer, shadows shifted. The whistle came again, this time sharper, urgent. The hunt was far from over. And deep in her chest, Lena knew, the hardest part hadn't even begun. How much farther could she push her body? Every step was punishment. Each time her boots scraped stone, her ribs sent fire through her chest. Her vision swam, tunneling into black at the edges. Yet she forced her weight into Diaz's shoulder, refusing to let him carry all of it. Pride, even bleeding out, was a cruel master. He said nothing, his jaw clenched, eyes locked on the ridge above. Every so often he paused to scan the horizon, his rifle sweeping like a metronome of survival, always measured, always precise. The enemy whistle echoed again, faint but certain. They were closing in. Lena swallowed hard, forcing the words past her dry throat. We can't keep outrunning them. We're not, Diaz muttered, we're outthinking them. And what's the plan when the ridge runs out? His silence stretched, he had none. Still they climbed. The rocks scraped Lena's palms as she clung to the slope, her body weak but stubborn. Dust filled her lungs, the taste bitter and metallic. She felt every beat of her heart slower, heavier, like it resented her for asking it to keep going. Her mind flicked back to her team, the medic, the sergeant, the others, ghosts now but loud inside her head. She could almost hear them urging her up the rocks, demanding she not stop. She led them into hell, she owed them more than collapse. When they reached the crest, Diaz lowered her against a boulder, his breath harsh in the stillness. He crouched low, rifle scanning. The desert spread before them, flat, endless, silvered by moonlight. No cover, no rescue, only exposure. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. So this was your big idea. Diaz didn't answer. He adjusted his scope, peering into the distance. Then his body stilled. There. She followed his line of sight, squinting against the haze. At first she saw nothing but rock and sand. Then faint, almost invisible, a structure, half buried, broken walls jutting from the earth like ribs. What is it? She whispered. Not on the map, Diaz replied. His voice carried weight, suspicion. A forgotten outpost, a ruin, or something else, something deliberately hidden. Her gut twisted. The enemy hadn't hunted them at random, she was sure of it. And now, staring at the fractured silhouette on the horizon, she felt that truth harden. That's why we were here, she murmured. That's what they didn't want us to find. Diaz's jaw tightened, or that's where they'll finish what they started. The whistle cut through the night again, closer now, too close. We don't have a choice, Lena said, forcing her body upright. Her side screamed, blood soaking fresh through her shirt. She staggered but steadied herself against the boulder. If that place has answers, we go. Diaz studied her, his face unreadable. You can barely stand. Her eyes flared, then drag me again, but we move. He didn't argue. Maybe he saw the fire in her eyes. Maybe he knew there was no breaking her. He slung her arm back over his shoulder, and together they descended the ridge. The journey blurred, sand shifting beneath their boots, shadows stretching like hands. The outpost drew closer, rising from the earth like a grave marker. Its walls were cracked, scorched, riddled with bullet scars. Someone had fought here once, hard. Diaz led the way through a gap in the stone, rifle raised. Lena stumbled after him, her pistol loose in her grip. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the smell of dust and rusted metal. Their footsteps echoed in the hollow space, each one too loud, too revealing. She leaned against a wall, catching her breath. Faint moonlight slipped through broken beams, painting the floor in silver stripes, and there, half buried in debris, was a trunk, military issue. Her pulse quickened. Diaz moved first, dragging the trunk into the open. The lock was snapped, the metal scarred. He pried it open, and the smell of oil and old paper spilled out. Files, weapons, radios. But it was the file on top that froze Lena's blood. Her name. She snatched it with trembling fingers, ignoring the pain. The folder was thick, stamped with classified markings. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the pages in disbelief. Details, movements, personal notes, information no one outside her command should have. How the hell did this get here? Diaz demanded, his voice sharp. She didn't answer, she couldn't, her throat closed as she read words that shouldn't exist. Her sister's name, her father's, their addresses, their routines. This wasn't just military intelligence, it was personal. Her chest tightened, nausea rising. Diaz's eyes narrowed. Looks like you have more explaining to do. She snapped the folder shut, clutching it to her chest. This isn't me. Then why's your life sitting in a box in the middle of nowhere? Her lips trembled, but her voice steadied. Because someone wanted to use me, someone wanted leverage. Diaz studied her, suspicion hardening, or maybe someone wanted a reason to point the finger. Her anger flared. If I betrayed you, Diaz, I'd be dead already, do you get that? I'm bleeding out because I stayed in the fight, not because I ran. The silence between them was razor sharp. Then footsteps. Both of them froze, weapons up. Shadows slid along the wall. The whistle came again, inside the ruin this time. They'd been followed. Diaz cursed under his breath, his rifle sweeping. Lena pressed her back against the stone, the file clutched tight in her hand, her pulse thundered. The enemy poured through the gaps, 3, 4, 5 shapes, rifles gleaming. Gunfire ripped through the silence. Diaz fired first, sharp and precise. One dropped. Lena raised her pistol, her aim wavering from weakness but steady enough to drop another. The ruin echoed with blasts, stone shattering, dust rising. She stumbled, nearly falling. Diaz caught her arm, dragging her deeper into the outpost. They ducked behind a collapsed wall as bullets chewed the air. Her chest heaved, her side burned. The folder pressed against her ribs, heavier than lead. This wasn't random, this wasn't survival. This was a message. And the message was clear, someone somewhere wanted her erased. Diaz reloaded, his hands steady. We can't stay here, they'll box us in. Her eyes flicked to the folder, to the names written inside, to her sister's face staring back from a photograph. Her voice was a whisper, trembling with both rage and fear. Diaz, this isn't just about us, they know my family. His head snapped toward her. Then we finish this, whatever this is, we end it. Another burst of gunfire shattered the stone above them. Dust rained down. Lena closed her eyes for a beat, steadying her breath. She could give in to the pain, she could let despair swallow her. Or she could stand. Her father's words echoed again. Strength isn't what keeps you alive, it's what you give away. She opened her eyes, fire burned in them now. This wasn't just about surviving the night. This was about protecting the ones who didn't even know they were in danger. The ruin shook with another volley. Lena gritted her teeth, her voice low, fierce. Then let's make them regret leaving us alive. She had always believed silence could be armor, but on that night the silence was crushing. The mountain pass had turned into a trap, and the weight of it pressed against her chest as if the rocks themselves had chosen sides. The radio was a mess of static, the kind that felt almost alive, whispering failure back into her ears. She crouched against a boulder slick with night dew, her fingers tightening on the rifle as though gripping it hard enough might erase the truth unraveling around her. Had she miscalculated, or had the enemy been waiting all along? The squad had scattered into smaller pockets of cover, the crack of rifles and the hiss of ricochets sparking through the darkness. Men she trusted, voices she knew, suddenly distant, shouting fragments cut short by noise, by fear, by the brutality of seconds that moved too fast. And through it all, her heart refused to surrender to panic. She felt fear, yes, but not collapse. Fear was familiar. It was almost steadying, a rhythm her body had learned long ago. Somewhere down the slope, Corporal Ramirez's voice broke through, raw, ragged. We're pinned, we need, then it cut. A silence heavier than any gunfire. She pressed her eyes shut, her lips parting with a wordless ache that threatened to swallow her. Every life lost was not just a soldier, not just a name. They were threads in her story, threads she couldn't allow to be torn apart. But something gnawed at her mind, deeper than the chaos. A decision she had made earlier in the mission. One she hadn't confessed, not to them, not to anyone. She had chosen a route. She had pushed for it with quiet conviction, believing speed mattered more than safety. And now, under the ruthless moon, she couldn't ignore the possibility. They were in this kill zone because she had insisted. Her eyes opened to the sharp glow of a tracer ripping the night. She ducked lower, inhaling dirt, stone, blood. Pride and guilt fought in her chest, which one would win. Nearby, Sergeant Keller scrambled against the rocks, his silhouette trembling but alive. His voice, low and urgent, cut through the rattling of her thoughts. We don't hold, we don't survive, you know that. His eyes met hers, eyes ringed with exhaustion but demanding something more. She didn't answer right away. What could she say? That every sound, every scream, every burst of fire carved itself into her bones, and she was barely holding her own weight under it. That she felt responsible, yet had no time to beg forgiveness. Instead, she gave him a nod, a small one, enough to steady him, maybe even steady herself. The minutes stretched, elastic and cruel. She moved from cover to cover, crawling, sliding, pushing her body through mud and broken rock. Her breath stayed shallow, controlled the way her father once taught her when she was a child learning to fire her first rifle on an empty field at dawn. Breathing half the shot, he had told her, resting a hand on her small shoulder. The other half is believing you can take it. She had believed then, she needed to believe now. Her rifle rose, her eyes settling on a faint shadow moving against the ridge. She squeezed. The figure dropped, swallowed by the mountain's dark. No time to feel triumph, only survival, only another breath. And yet, beneath the grit and sweat, she couldn't escape the whisper in her head. If they all die here, their blood will be yours to carry. She hated herself for hearing it. She hated herself more for knowing it might be true. The hours bled together. Sometimes she counted shots. Sometimes she counted the seconds between heartbeats. Other times she counted faces in her memory, each man and woman under her command, each story unfinished. There was Ramirez with his pocket notebook of poems he never read aloud. There was Louis, the youngest, who had once asked her if war ever stopped feeling unreal. And Keller, the man now huddled beside her, who had carried more weight on his back than most men dared. They weren't expendable, not to her, not ever. And so she stayed upright, even when her shoulders seared with pain from shrapnel, even when her vision swam. She let the night carve its story on her skin, but she did not bow. She couldn't, because every second she refused to fold was another second they lived. Toward dawn, the gunfire thinned. The mountains grew quiet, almost cruelly so, as if mocking the loss scattered in the dirt. She could feel the shift. The enemy had drawn back, not defeated, but calculating, waiting. She knew they would come again. She knew this wasn't over. Her hand tightened on the rifle, the barrel hot, the metal scarred. And then her eyes lifted to the pale horizon, where the sky bled light into the dark. She let herself breathe, just once, steady and slow. What came next, she didn't know, but surrender, that wasn't written in her. Not tonight, not ever. The dawn looked soft, almost innocent, as if the mountains had chosen to forget what had happened in the night. A blush of pale gold touched the ridges, and the mist curled through the valleys like smoke from an unseen fire. For a heartbeat, it seemed almost peaceful, but she knew better. The silence wasn't peace, it was a predator circling, patient and cruel. Her hands were numb around the rifle, though the barrel still carried the ghost of its last shot. Blood had dried on her sleeve, stiff and dark, tugging at her skin whenever she moved. She didn't even know when the shrapnel had cut her. Pain was a constant now, woven into her body like an old scar. What unsettled her more was how quiet her squad had become. Too quiet. She scanned the slope. Keller crouched a few meters away, his head bent, whispering to Ramirez, no, not Ramirez. Ramirez was gone. She felt her throat tighten at the realization. It was Louis, the young one, his helmet tilted too low as if he was trying to hide from the sky itself. He clutched something in his hand, fingers trembling. For a moment, she thought it was his weapon. Then she saw it, a small folded square of paper, a letter. His lips moved, silently reading words not meant for this place. She wanted to look away, she wanted to give him that privacy, but she couldn't. Because his face, pale, too young, too raw, reminded her of someone else, someone she hadn't spoken of in years, her brother. He had been 19 when he died, not here, not in this war, but in another land, another ambush. She had never forgiven herself for not being there that night, for letting him carry his fear alone. She had joined not just for duty, not just for country. She had joined because of him. Every shot she took, every order she gave, all of it had his ghost in it. And now Louis, hunched and trembling, brought the ache crashing back. The silence pressed tighter. She crouched lower, listening. The enemy was still out there, waiting. She could feel it like a storm sitting just beyond the horizon, and she knew they wouldn't wait forever. Eyes up, Keller murmured, crawling closer. His voice was steady, but the hollowness in his eyes betrayed him. They'll come again, you know it. She nodded, but she also knew something Keller didn't, something she hadn't told any of them. Hours earlier, before the firefight, she had caught movement in the rocks, shapes where there shouldn't have been shapes, shadows that lingered too long. She had dismissed it, told herself it was nothing because they were already pressed for time, because admitting doubt would mean slowing down, and slowing down meant risking failure of the mission. Now the guilt pressed like a blade against her ribs. Maybe if she had spoken up, they wouldn't be bleeding here. Maybe they wouldn't be surrounded at all. Her throat felt dry. She almost told Keller, almost confessed, but the words withered in her chest. What good would it do now? Better to carry it alone. Better to let them think the trap was inevitable, not avoidable. A crack shattered the stillness, a single shot from the ridge. Louis's letter slipped from his hand as he ducked, wide-eyed. She dragged him down by the collar just as another bullet sparked against stone where his head had been. The quiet was broken, the storm was here again. Gunfire erupted, sharp and furious. Rocks splintered, dirt kicked into the air, her shoulders screamed as she raised her rifle, sighting through the blur. Breath steady, breath controlled, she fired, a shadow fell, another, still more rose in their place. Beside her, Keller cursed under his breath, pressing his back to the rock. Lewis fired wildly, panic in every squeeze of the trigger. She grabbed his arm, forced his rifle down for a second. "Breathe," she hissed. "You'll waste every shot if you don't." His eyes locked on hers, terrified, but something in her tone anchored him. He inhaled, exhaled, tried again. This time the shot found its mark. She felt a flicker of something, pride maybe, or hope, but it was fragile, too fragile to hold on to. The minutes blurred into an hour, maybe more. The enemy pressed hard, then pulled back, regrouping, pressing again. Each wave felt heavier than the last, as if the mountain itself wanted them buried. And through it all, she stayed upright, moving, fighting, refusing the collapse her body begged for. By midday, the gunfire ebbed again, fading into uneasy stillness. Keller slumped against the rock, sweat streaking dirt down his face. Lewis clutched the letter again, whispering to it like a prayer. She turned her gaze to the horizon. Somewhere beyond these mountains lay their target, their mission, the reason they had risked this route at all. Somewhere beyond lay the possibility that this suffering meant something. But here now the question gnawed at her. How many more would she lose before they reached it? How many ghosts would follow her home this time? The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of smoke, of fire not yet visible. She gripped her rifle tighter. The fight wasn't done, it was only changing. Would she have the strength to change with it, or would her silence, the truth she carried, break them all before the mountain did? The wind shifted just after midday, carrying with it a strange heaviness. It wasn't just the weight of smoke anymore. It was something closer, something deliberate. She felt it before she heard it, the silence behind the rocks, the absence of movement where there should have been chaos. The enemy had pulled back again, but not out of mercy, not out of loss. They were waiting. She pressed her back harder against the boulder, her eyes narrowing at the ridge lines above. The light had changed, harsher now, carving shadows that made the mountains look alive. Every crack in the stone, every hollow, seemed to breathe with unseen eyes. She knew they weren't gone. They were watching, calculating, and that silence was worse than gunfire. Keller crawled toward her, his breath ragged. "They're not finished," he muttered. His voice had lost the steel it carried hours ago. "They're waiting for something." She nodded once, keeping her gaze fixed. Waiting for what? Reinforcements, darkness, or... Her stomach tightened. Or for one of them to break. She turned her head slightly, eyes landing on Lewis. He was pale, clutching his rifle too tight, his lips moving against the paper folded in his hand. His letter again, his anchor, his lifeline. He looked up at her as though he felt her watching. His mouth opened, then closed, and in that silence she realized something she had missed. Fear wasn't all that trembled in him. There was something else. Something hidden. "Lewis," she whispered, crawling closer, her tone calm, deliberate. "Show me your pack." He froze, his eyes widened, darting between her and Keller. His silence said everything. Keller shifted, confused, suspicious. His rifle lowered just slightly as his gaze flicked toward the boy. "What's going on?" Her heart pounded, not from fear but from the sick confirmation rising in her chest. She had seen it before, that subtle clutching of gear, that unwillingness to move too far from one bag, one pack. She had ignored it in him, maybe because he was young, maybe because she wanted to believe none of them would carry betrayal into this mountain. "Open it," she said softly, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through him. Lewis shook his head, just barely, but enough. The air between them thickened, heavier than the mountain itself. Keller's hand rose slowly, pointing his rifle now. "Kid, don't make me do this." Lewis's lips trembled, his hand opened, the letter slipping to the dirt. His voice cracked, breaking the silence. "I didn't want." The rest was drowned in the sudden thunder of gunfire erupting from the ridge. The enemy had been waiting, watching, and now, triggered by hesitation, by betrayal exposed, they struck with merciless precision. She lunged forward, dragging Lewis down as bullets tore the stone above. Keller returned fire, his curses lost in the storm. Dust exploded around them, filling the air with grit, choking every breath. Her ears rang, her shoulder burned. She shoved Lewis flat, ripping open his pack with one hand. What spilled out wasn't rations, it wasn't gear. It was a beacon, compact, sleek, blinking faint red, a transmitter. Her throat went dry. He had been feeding them, feeding their enemy every step they took. Rage surged hot and violent, but she shoved it down. There wasn't time, not for anger, not for explanations, only survival. She ripped the device from the pack, smashing it against the rock until it split, sparks dying in the dirt. Then she turned her rifle back toward the ridge, firing blind into the storm until the ringing in her ears was louder than the shots. Lewis curled against the stone, sobbing now, his voice broken. "I didn't mean, I didn't think." Her chest twisted, a part of her wanted to scream at him, to demand why, to force the truth from his trembling lips. But another part, the soldier, the one bound to the lives still fighting beside her, knew there was no time. Get up, she snapped, dragging him by the collar. You don't get to collapse now, you help us fight or you die with them. Keller's face was carved with fury as he ducked down beside her. His voice was sharp, guttural. He sold us out, we should put him down right here. The thought was poison, and yet it pulsed in the air between them, undeniable. Her eyes flicked between Keller, Lewis, and the ridge, every second stretched, brittle and thin. She had to choose right now. If she let Keller end Lewis, they would lose a fighter, even if it was a broken one. But if she spared him, they carried a traitor who might still be bleeding them toward their graves. Her jaw tightened, she steadied her breath. Not yet, she said, her voice low, deadly calm. We use every breath until there's nothing left. Lewis's wide, wet eyes met hers, terrified, desperate. Keller's glare burned, but he obeyed for now. The storm of fire raged on, pinning them harder against the mountain. And inside her chest, her own storm built, the knowledge that her silence, her decisions, and now this betrayal had tied them all into a noose tightening by the hour. And still she refused surrender, not to the enemy, not to death, not even to the ghosts clawing at her conscience. The mountain had stopped feeling like rock and earth. It felt like a cage. Every crack of gunfire was a bar closing tighter, every ricochet a reminder that the air itself wanted them dead. She pressed her cheek to the dirt, tasting grit and blood, her pulse steady only because she forced it to be. The betrayal still burned like acid in her chest. The boy's face haunted her, wide eyes wet with regret, yet too late to undo what he had done. Keller hadn't stopped glaring at Lewis since the firefight began. His jaw worked in silence, his rifle spitting short, disciplined bursts. He didn't need to speak, his rage was loud enough without words. And Lewis just kept low, his shoulders shaking, his rifle trembling in hands that no longer deserved to carry it. But this wasn't the moment to unravel, not yet. The enemy pressed harder now, their fire coordinated, pinning the squad tighter against the slope. She shifted, scanning the ridge for a weakness. They couldn't hold here, not with dwindling ammo, not with fractured trust. If they stayed, they would die. That was truth, cold and undeniable. Keller, she shouted over the gunfire, her voice raw but commanding. We can't hold the pass, we move. His head snapped toward her, eyes blazing. With him, his rifle jerked toward Lewis. She didn't flinch, with all of us or none of us. The silence between bursts was razor sharp. For a second she thought Keller would defy her, thought he'd turn his rifle on the boy then and there, but he spat in the dirt instead, his fury redirected into another volley of shots. That was his answer for now. She scanned the terrain again. Downhill was death, exposed, open. Uphill was suicide, steep, barren, which left only the narrow cut in the ridge to their left, a thin vein through the rock, jagged and dark, risky, unknown, but alive. We move through the cut, she called out, her voice slicing through the chaos. Lewis flinched, his lips parting. That's. Her glare cut him short. He swallowed hard, nodding, for once silent. Keller shifted first, covering their move with short bursts. She crawled behind him, dragging Lewis when he stumbled, her shoulder burning with every jolt. Bullets hissed past, striking sparks from the rock. The cut loomed closer, a mouth in the mountain. Every step was a choice, move and risk the shot, stay and die anyway. The moment they reached the narrow gap, she shoved Lewis inside, Keller following with a growl. The passage swallowed them, darkness pressing close. For the first time in hours, the gunfire dulled. Still there, still hunting, but muted by stone. They stumbled deeper, breaths harsh, the silence between shots louder than the shots themselves. Her body screamed for rest, for stillness, but her mind refused. The cut might be escape, or it might be another trap. Lewis's whisper broke the quiet, shaking and fragile. I didn't want to betray you. I thought if I helped them, maybe they'd let me live. The words slammed into her chest harder than any bullet. She stopped walking, turned on him. Her voice came low, jagged. And what about us? Did you think they'd let us live? His face crumpled. He looked younger than ever, just a boy caught in something he couldn't carry. I was scared, he whispered. I still am. Keller stepped forward, his rifle half raised. Scared or not, you put us here. You killed Ramirez. You nearly killed all of us. The darkness around them seemed to press tighter. The cut was too narrow for this fight, and yet it was happening anyway. The rage, the guilt, the cracks in all of them colliding in a space too small to contain it. Her hand rose, steady but firm. Enough. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, echoed against the stone. For a moment, even Keller lowered his rifle. She turned her gaze back to Lewis. Her chest ached, not just from the wound, but from the recognition of what fear could do, of how close she herself had come to mistakes that might have destroyed them. He was guilty, but he was also human, and humans broke. Still, the choice pressed against her. Keep him alive, risk Keller's trust shattering completely, or let Keller end it and lose the last shred of her own. The silence was broken by a sound deeper in the cut. Not voices, not footsteps, but something, a scrape, a shift of stone. Her rifle snapped up, Keller mirrored her. Lewis froze, his tears drying on his dirt-streaked cheeks. The enemy was already inside. She didn't have time for judgment anymore, she only had time for survival. And as the darkness ahead moved again, she realized something chilling. The cut wasn't just an escape route, it was a funnel. They hadn't slipped away from death, they had walked straight into its throat. The cut narrowed until the walls pressed so close she could feel the stone brush her shoulders. The air smelled of dust and iron, each breath shallow, almost metallic. She raised her rifle higher, every muscle wound tight. Behind her, Keller's boots scraped, steady but heavy, his presence a weight she both relied on and feared might fracture at any second. In Lewis, she could hear him breathing too fast, the tremor in each inhale echoing against the rock like a confession. Then came the sound again, not the scrape of boots this time, but something sharper, the unmistakable click of metal against stone. They weren't alone. Her finger tightened on the trigger, her heartbeat pounded in her ears, but her voice stayed low, steady. Hold. Keller didn't. His rifle barked once, muzzle flash searing the shadows. The sound thundered through the narrow cut, ricocheting off walls until it felt like the mountain itself was roaring. And then the darkness erupted. Gunfire poured from ahead, sparks flaring against rock. Bullets screamed down the passage, stone shattering into dust clouds that stung their eyes. She dove to the side, pressing into the wall, returning fire in sharp, controlled bursts. The confined space turned every shot into deafening thunder. Lewis stumbled, nearly falling, but she yanked him down before a round carved through where his chest had been. His terrified cry was swallowed by the noise. Push forward, Keller shouted, rage and desperation fused in his voice. But she knew forward was suicide. The cut funneled them straight into a kill zone. The enemy had planned this, herded them here like prey. Her mind raced, options, angles, survival, and then her eyes caught it, a split in the wall, barely wide enough for one. Jagged, steep, uncertain, but it wasn't the funnel. This way, she barked, shoving Lewis toward it. He hesitated, wide-eyed, will never fit. Her palm slammed into his back, hard enough to make him stumble inside. Move. Keller shot her a look, half fury, half trust, before covering her with another burst and sliding in after. She followed last, bullets snapping against the rock at her heels as she ducked into the crevice. The passage twisted, clawing at their bodies with stone edges, forcing them low, scraping skin raw. The darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment there was nothing but their breaths, harsh and uneven. And then silence. The enemy fire didn't follow, not yet. They collapsed in a hollow where the crevice widened, just enough to crouch, just enough to breathe. Keller leaned against the wall, sweat cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. His eyes found hers, hard and unyielding. This doesn't end well, he said flatly. She didn't answer because he was right. Lewis curled into himself, clutching the folded letter like it could still save him. His voice broke the silence, thin and cracked. I never wanted this, I didn't want to die. The words stabbed at her more than the shrapnel ever had, because she understood. Fear had clawed at her too. The difference was she had learned to carry it, he hadn't, and it had cost them. Keller's rifle shifted toward the boy again. His jaw was set, his intent clear. She stepped between them, her body a barrier, her eyes locked on Keller. No, she said softly, not like this. His fury flared. He betrayed us. Ramirez is dead because of him, we're next because of him. Her throat tightened, she wanted to agree. A part of her screamed to let Keller do it, to make the anger simple, clean. But nothing about this was simple, and killing him here now, it wouldn't save them. It would only stain what little humanity they had left. Her voice cracked, but she held it firm. If we die together. If we live, we carry it, all of it. That's the only way this means anything. Keller's rifle trembled. His breath came sharp through clenched teeth. Then, with a guttural curse, he shoved the weapon down. The sound of metal against stone echoed like a final verdict. For a moment, none of them spoke. And then the mountain answered for them. A roar not human but earth itself. An explosion deep in the pass where they had been minutes ago. The enemy had sealed it. The funnel was now a grave. The three of them froze, the shock pressing heavier than the dust settling in the air. Her chest rose, fell, the truth settled like iron in her blood. They weren't supposed to be here. None of this was supposed to unfold this way, and yet it had, because war didn't care about plans or promises or even justice. What it cared about was who refused to surrender. She lifted her rifle again, eyes steady despite the sting of dust, despite the ache of wounds that would not heal. She looked at Keller, then Lewis, then the jagged path still ahead. We keep moving, she said. Neither argued, not because they believed in survival, but because in her voice, in her stare, they heard something else. Defiance. Not against the enemy alone, but against fear, against despair, against the pull to collapse. They moved into the darkness again, every step slow, uncertain, but theirs. Hours later, when the mountain finally opened to a pale horizon, none of them spoke. The sky stretched wide and endless, carrying the weight of both victory and loss. She lowered herself to the ground, her body finally surrendering even if her spirit hadn't. Her eyes lifted to that horizon, the faint light washing over her dirt-streaked face. No words left her lips, none were needed. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply endures. It simply acts. And in that silence, surrounded by ghosts and scars, she remained unbroken.